Welcome back to Government 148. In the last segment, we were discussing Sharon's administration, so I want to resume from that point onward. You may recall that I mentioned that Sharon rejected the Oslo II peace process, and for all intent and purposes, really the accord was all but dead. In June 2002, President Bush, in order to placate the Arabs, he came up with a so-called roadmap for peace proposal. Now let me elaborate a little bit. You may recall that in 2011 we had the September 11 attack, and as a result of that attack, President Bush changed American foreign policy to deal with the global war on terror, and part of that strategy was to attack Iraq. In the meantime, the Arabs were getting upset at the United States not putting any pressure on Israel. And so in order to placate them so he could get some support from them for his new policy in the Middle East, he proposed the so-called roadmap to peace proposal. What was significant about his proposal was the very idea and the audacity of it. For the first time, an American president had called for an independent, sovereign Palestinian state living in peace next to Israel. So this became known as the two-state solution. However, President Bush's plan was a conditional plan based on performance. It was predicated on satisfying a number of requirements and conditions, including end to violence by the Palestinian and reforming of their institutions and the authority, making it more democratic. And until those happen, there would be no peace. Moreover, Sharon accepted the proposal, but he himself put some 14 objections to it. And as an additional point, Sharon would not meet with Arafat, calling him a war criminal. He said he would not meet with them. So in order for the proposal to go forward, Mahmoud Abbas was appointed by the Palestinian Authority as the negotiator so that he could meet with Prime Minister Sharon. Now, again, the details of the roadmap proposal are in your assigned readings, and therefore I will not get into these discussions here. But the bottom line was that the talks really got nowhere because there was one meeting, but it really didn't get anywhere. In the meantime, what was happening was that the United States, as a result of the global war on terror in the aftermath of September 11, the U.S. is becoming completely engrossed in the invasion and subsequent war in Iraq. Therefore, the United States really is not putting much pressure on Sharon to do something about the roadmap. Then in 2004, Sharon comes up with his own two-pronged strategy to deal with the Palestinian challenge. First, to deal with the threat of second intifada, which we mentioned in previous lecture. There was a lot of suicide bombers on the part of Palestinians. In July, he begins to erect the so-called security fence or a separation wall along and inside the West Bank. In other words, he's also expropriating territories from the West Bank, which is supposed to be the home for Palestinians, where the wall is moving, ingressing inside. Now, once completed, that wall will cover some 700 miles all around the West Bank to keep the Palestinian out. Sharon ignored United States as well as international calls against erecting such a barrier, which were judged in violation of international law. Also, in places, this wall goes as high as 30 feet high and with 60 feet wide ditches to prevent cars from even coming close to it. So that was the first prong. Secondly, he comes up with a plan which in my opinion was to divert attention from Israeli settlements in the occupied parts of West Bank and Jerusalem. Now remember, for many Zionists, the real Israel is these parts, the Judea and Samaria, and this is what defines Eretz, Greater Israel. So for them, this is what really matters, and they don't want to cede that to the Palestinians or let them create a state on that land. So to accomplish this task, Sharon decided that the best thing he could do is to shift the world's attention away from West Bank and Jerusalem to settlements in Gaza by announcing that since he doesn't have a peace partner, he is going to unilaterally dismantle some 24 settlements in Gaza. Again, remember, most Israelis don't care about Gaza. To them, it's really a worthless piece of real estate, and it's not part of Eretz Israel. Therefore, with the withdrawal from Gaza, as far as Sharon was concerned, Israel's withdrawal from, quote, all the occupied territories would now be complete, and therefore he doesn't have to worry about the other part. In the meantime, he also, to undermine the Palestinians and their leadership, especially now that Hamas had entered the picture, Hamas, the Islamic group in the Palestinian rank, he accelerated the targeted assassinations of the Palestinian leaders. Among the people who were killed was the Hamas leader, Sheikh Ahmad Yassin. First they tried to poison him in Jordan. When he didn't die, then they assassinated him. And then also another important leader, Abdul Aziz Rantisi. Actually, he was working with them, but they got working with Israelis and was willing to accommodate, but he got eliminated. So that was the essence of Sharon's strategy. Get the attention to the Gaza evacuation, and also to create the barrier to protect Israel from suicide bombers and to assassinate Palestinian leaders. On the domestic front, after falling out with the Labor coalition, as well as having difficulty with Likud, in 2005, Sharon formed a new political party called Kadima. And Kadima almost instantly became very, very popular. Several Likud officials, they defected and joined Kadima. And the success was so much that in November 2005 election, Kadima defeated both Likud and Labor. However, as fate would have it, a couple of months later, in January of 2006, after a second stroke, Sharon goes into a coma from which he never recovers and dies 8 years later in January 2014. After Sharon's lapse into coma, Ehud Olmert, one of his comrades, takes over the leadership of Kadima and becomes first an acting prime minister and then later formally the prime minister. Olmert is able to win the 2006 election and is able to govern until 2009. But by then, without Sharon at its helm, Kadima is mostly a history. In 2009, Benjamin Netanyahu makes a comeback as the leader of Likud. He had a falling out with Sharon, and they were rivals in Likud. And he is able to win the election and become the prime minister. Again, he ends up being re-elected in 2013, remaining as Israel's prime minister. What really is different between Netanyahu earlier in 1990s and now is that his strategy has been really also two-pronged. First, and he has said this, I don't have to infer this, he has said this in his campaign, he was able to successfully divert the world focus away from Palestinian issue, away from settlement issue, onto Iran's nuclear program. So the peace process was put in a back burner, and he said it many times, we won't even deal with the peace process until we first deal with Iran's nuclear program. So he has succeeded in delaying the peace process with focusing everyone's attention and Israel's policies toward Iran. Second, he has speeded up settlement building in Jerusalem and in the West Bank in order to make it impossible to establish a viable Palestinian state. In other words, under Netanyahu, we have reached a point in which the two-state solution is really arguably no longer viable. A lot of people, a lot of analysts feel that it's just too late. Too much has happened, too much building has taken place, so that really there cannot be a viable, contiguous Palestinian state. Again, I'm going to defer the discussion of these issues in terms of details to your reading assignments, which cover this area, especially the ending under the two-state solution, whether or not it's viable. So you should read up on these materials.